The history of St. Albert the Great is marked by a tireless search for knowledge and wisdom, always guided by faith in God. Born around 1200 in Lauingen, Germany, he was one of the greatest intellectuals of the Middle Ages and is considered the patron saint of scientists. From a young age, Alberto demonstrated a curious spirit and remarkable intelligence, which soon aroused the admiration of everyone around him. Since childhood, Alberto had access to formal education, something rare for many at the time, especially in remote regions of Germany. His parents, belonging to the nobility, noticed their son's talent and encouraged him to deepen his studies. The vocation for learning and the desire to understand the laws of nature were evident from an early age, which would be a striking trait throughout his life. In his youth, Alberto dedicated himself to basic studies in Germany, but his desire for knowledge led him to seek a more complete education in Italy. In the city of Padua, he came into contact with the most advanced teachings of the time, including philosophy and natural sciences. There, he studied the works of Aristotle and other Greek thinkers who at that time were beginning to influence Christian theology. In Padua, St. Albert the Great met the Dominican friars and was deeply impressed by the religious and intellectual life they led. The influence of the Dominicans was so intense that, in his early 20s, he decided to abandon secular life and join the order of preachers founded by São Domingos de Gusmão. This step would mark his life forever, uniting his thirst for knowledge with his religious vocation. The decision to join the Dominican order was a moment of rupture for St. Albert. He renounced the riches and privileges of his noble status, adopting a life of poverty and prayer. In the order, he would dedicate himself to combining his scientific training with the teachings of faith, seeking a deep understanding of the world that reflected the greatness of the Creator. After joining the order, St. Albert was sent to study in Cologne and then in Paris, where the universities were among the most prestigious in Europe. At the University of Paris, he delved into topics such as philosophy, theology, and natural sciences, laying the foundations for what would be one of the most brilliant academic careers in medieval Christianity. St. Albert the Great's contribution to the Church and science was immense. He believed that reason and faith were not incompatible, but that they complemented each other. For him, human intelligence was a divine gift that should be used to better understand the world created by God. This principle would guide his life and work, inspiring many generations of Catholic thinkers. Over the years of study and teaching, Alberto became a fervent defender of Aristotle's thought, seeking to integrate this philosophy with Christian theology. He pioneered the interpretation of Aristotle's works for the Christian context, highlighting that philosophical discoveries could serve as a path to understanding creation and divine order. However, the integration of Aristotelian thought was not simple. At the time, many Christians feared that pagan philosophy would conflict with the teachings of the faith. St. Albert the Great, however, argued that natural philosophy did not contradict faith, but helped to understand it more deeply. His intellectual boldness challenged prejudices and opened the way for a new dialogue between science and religion. As a teacher, San Alberto was known for his humility and dedication to his students. He believed that true wisdom should be shared and not withheld. Many of his disciples considered him a brilliant teacher, both for the vast knowledge he possessed and for his ability to explain complex subjects in an accessible way. Among his students, a young man called Thomas Aquinas stood out, who would become one of the greatest theologians in the history of the Church. St. Thomas was one of St. Albert the Great's most brilliant disciples, and the relationship between the two was one of deep admiration and respect. Alberto noticed Thomas's great talent and encouraged him to develop his own ideas, promoting the intellectual growth of the future Dr. Angelico. The friendship and respect between St. Albert and St. Thomas Aquinas represent one of the most beautiful legacies of Albert's life. He saw in Thomas a spirit equally thirsty for knowledge and dedicated to the truth. Alberto was a mentor to Thomas, but he also learned a lot from him, showing a humility that would inspire his students and all those who studied alongside him. St. Albert the Great wrote extensively on various topics, leaving behind a monumental work. He produced texts on philosophy, theology, science, botany, mineralogy, zoology, and even alchemy. His encyclopedia of knowledge covered areas that few dared to explore, and his writings are considered pioneers in many scientific disciplines. The work of St. Albert the Great on the natural sciences was especially important. At a time when many rejected empirical observation, he argued that the study of nature should be based on rigorous and careful methods. He believed that natural phenomena were manifestations of God's work and therefore worthy of being studied with respect and admiration. In the field of botany, São Alberto carried out detailed studies on plants and their medicinal properties. He catalogued several species and investigated their applications in medicine, establishing valuable knowledge for later scholars. His dedication to botanical research is an example of how science can serve the common good and the glorification of God. Another notable aspect of his scientific work was mineralogy. São Alberto dedicated himself to studying minerals and their characteristics, classifying them meticulously. He observed the physical and chemical properties of substances and recorded his discoveries, contributing to the development of geological knowledge in the Middle Ages. In the study of animals, São Alberto also demonstrated impressive zeal. He accurately described numerous species, many of which had never been analyzed by Christian scholars. His research into zoology was so detailed that he is considered a pioneer in the field, having documented behaviors and habitats that enriched the understanding of creation. In addition to natural sciences, St. Albert the Great investigated alchemy, a discipline that sought the transmutation of metals and the study of substances. At the time, alchemy was a mix of science and mysticism, but São Alberto approached the topic with seriousness and rigor, separating true knowledge from superstitions. He saw alchemy as an opportunity to understand the nature of matter. St. Albert the Great's approach to alchemy was innovative, as he believed that all true knowledge must be compatible with the Christian faith. His investigation of the properties of materials, their transformations and mixtures, was guided by the belief that creation reflected divine order. This perspective would be essential for the formation of modern science. In the midst of so many studies, St. Albert never strayed from the life of prayer and devotion. He considered science and theology as two sides of the same coin, both serving the same end, the glorification of God. He spent hours in meditation, asking for wisdom to understand the truth and discern what was truly relevant to the salvation of souls. As a Dominican friar, St. Albert the Great maintained an austere and penitential life. Despite his knowledge, he never sought fame or recognition. On the contrary, he saw his work as a service to God and humanity, believing that humility was the basis of all true wisdom. In the year 1260, St. Albert was named Bishop of Regensburg, Bavaria. Although he did not desire the position, he accepted the appointment as an act of obedience to the Church. As bishop, he continued to work tirelessly for peace and justice, becoming an example of leadership and humility. Even in this position of authority, he preferred to live simply and serve the poor. During his episcopate, St. Albert sought to reform the clergy and increase the training of priests, emphasizing the importance of education and spirituality. He argued that church leaders should be examples of virtue and wisdom, inspiring the flock through their lives. This pastoral zeal had a profound impact on the diocese and the church as a whole. After 2 years as bishop, St. Albert asked to be released from his episcopal responsibilities. He felt that his true vocation was in academic life and preaching. The request was accepted, and he was able to return to Dominican life, dedicating himself once again to studies and the training of new priests and scholars. Returning to religious life, St. Albert continued to write and teach until the end of his life. He saw teaching as a divine mission, an opportunity to transmit sacred knowledge and understanding of the wonders of creation. His classes were popular, and his students were deeply grateful for the master's dedication and patience. St. Albert the Great viewed education as a sacred responsibility. For him, knowledge should not be kept, but shared for the spiritual and intellectual edification of the entire Church. He believed that each scientific discovery was a step towards understanding the divine order, and that, therefore, science and faith should be allies. In his theological writings, St. Albert sought to reconcile the truths of faith with philosophical discoveries. He argued that reason, being a gift from God, was a legitimate means of approaching the truth. His works reflected this commitment to the truth, without ever putting faith in the background, but, on the contrary, strengthening it with rational arguments. St. Albert the Great was a true pioneer in integrating reason and faith, and his legacy as a theologian is as profound as his scientific contributions. He wrote complete treatises on Christian doctrine, covering topics such as the nature of God, the Trinity, and the sacraments. In all these themes, he sought to answer the great theological questions of the time, always respecting the tradition of the Church and the teachings of the Fathers. His theology was marked by a balance between academic rigor and spiritual devotion. He believed that all wisdom, regardless of its origin, should converge on Christ, the supreme truth. Thus, by using Aristotelian philosophy, Alberto sought to deepen the understanding of the mystery of God without ever abandoning the principles of the Catholic faith. In one of his most influential works, De Adhaerendo Deo, St. Albert the Great explores the union of the soul with God, describing how divine love transforms the human heart. He taught that, above all knowledge, was the love of God, which was the true objective of all search. This text inspired many souls to seek a more intense life of prayer and surrender. At the end of his life, San Alberto's health began to decline, but his spirit remained vibrant and dedicated to teaching. Even at an advanced age, he continued to preach, write, and guide his disciples. In 1274, he participated in the Council of Lyon, where he defended the union of the churches of East and West, also showing himself to be a defender of peace and unity. During the Council of Lyon, St. Albert was one of the most influential voices, trying to establish dialogue with the Orthodox Church. He believed that division among Christians was a wound in the body of Christ, and that reconciliation was possible through mutual understanding and respect. This ecumenical vision was rare at the time, but it revealed the depth of his charity and vision of the Church. In his final years, St. Albert suffered from memory loss and physical deterioration, but he remained faithful to his calling until the end. In 1280, he died in Cologne, surrounded by his Dominican brothers at the age of 80. His death was deeply felt, not only by the Dominican order, but by the entire Church, which was losing one of its greatest teachers and saints. After his death, St. Albert the Great was quickly venerated as a saint for his life of holiness, wisdom, and humility. His devotion to the truth and love of God became examples for those who sought a life dedicated to Christ. In 1622, he was beatified by Pope Gregory XV, and in 1931, Pope Pius XI proclaimed him Doctor of the Church. The proclamation of St. Albert the Great as Doctor of the Church was a recognition of his intellectual and spiritual legacy. He became the patron saint of scientists and scholars, being a model of how faith and science can walk together in harmony. His life testifies that study and research can be ways of praising God and contributing to the edification of the Church. St. Albert the Great was also called the Great due to the vastness of his knowledge and the depth of his understanding of the natural and supernatural world. This title, which he never sought for himself, reflects the impact of his work and the way he has inspired and continues to inspire many Christians to seek a deeper relationship with God. The example of St. Albert the Great teaches us the importance of cultivating both intelligence and faith, For him, knowing creation meant knowing more about the Creator. He always said that the true wise man is the one who recognizes the greatness of God in all things, and who knows that all human wisdom is limited without divine help. St. Albert's influence on St. Thomas Aquinas was especially significant. St. Thomas, influenced by his master, expanded and systematized many of Albert's teachings. Both worked to unite faith and reason, but with complementary approaches. St. Thomas Aquinas recognized the value of Albert's method of empirical investigation, applying it to his own theology. Over the centuries, many scholars and scientists have seen St. Albert the Great as a model of how science can enrich spirituality. He taught that the universe is a reflection of divine order, and that investigating nature is a way of worshipping God. Thus, each new knowledge about the world was, for him, a revelation of divine wisdom. One of the most inspiring aspects of St. Albert the Great was his humility. Even with vast knowledge, he never considered himself superior to anyone. On the contrary, he saw wisdom as a responsibility, a gift to be shared for the edification of others. This trait made him an example for many teachers and scholars of the Church. The Dominican order has always been very proud of St. Albert the Great. He is remembered as one of the greatest intellectuals the order ever produced, along with St. Thomas Aquinas. His life dedicated to study and holiness is an example of how the order of preachers has always valued the search for truth in all its dimensions. Devotion to St. Albert the Great spread across Europe, especially in academic communities. Many universities and colleges dedicated their work and research to him, asking for his intercession so that studies could contribute to the good of humanity and the growth of faith. In several countries, he is venerated as the patron saint of students and teachers. In the 20th century, St. Albert the Great continued to be a relevant figure for the Church, especially in times of intense scientific change. His life and teachings were seen as a model for Catholics seeking to integrate the discoveries of modern science with faith. He remembered that all true science points to God. During the Second Vatican Council, the Council Fathers mentioned St. Albert the Great as an example of the harmony between faith and science. His life showed that the Church was never an enemy of progress, but that, on the contrary, it always sought to ensure that human knowledge was at the service of truth and good. St. Albert was proof that science can strengthen faith. St. Albert the Great's contribution to natural theology was one of the most notable of his time. He believed that observation and study of creatures could lead to knowledge of God. His theological approach, which united divine revelation with the study of the physical world, was a precursor to what would later be called natural theology. St. Albert the Great was also an advocate of social justice. As a bishop, he defended the poor and worked for peace among Bavarian nobles. He believed that knowledge and spirituality should always be accompanied by charity and service to others, especially those most in need. For St. Albert the Great, charity was the greatest of all virtues, the one that pleased God most. He saw knowledge as a means of serving others, not as a form of superiority. His love for the poor and his life of humility are remembered as central aspects of his holiness. Even after his death, the legacy of St. Albert the Great remains alive through his writings. His works are still studied and cited by theologians, philosophers, and scientists, who see in them a source of wisdom and inspiration. His writings on philosophy and science continue to influence Christian thought. Among the best-known works of St. Albert the Great, his comments on the works of Aristotle stand out. He wrote long expositions on logic, ethics, physics, and metaphysics, always seeking to show how Aristotelian thought could be harmonized with Christian theology. This synthesis was fundamental to scholasticism. St. Albert the Great's love for truth led him to explore all aspects of human knowledge with the same devotion he had for faith. He believed that God is the source of all truth, and that therefore every sincere search for knowledge is a search for God himself. Pope Pius X, when proclaiming St. Albert as Doctor of the Church, highlighted the relevance of his life and work for modernity. In a time of great scientific advances, São Alberto is seen as an example for those who wish to live their faith in harmony with knowledge. His doctrine remains alive and continues to teach men true wisdom. The holiness of St. Albert the Great is recognized throughout the Church. His life was proof that knowledge and humility can go together, that science can be at the service of love for God and neighbor. His intercession is requested by students, teachers, and scientists who wish to follow his example. In his spirituality, St. Albert the Great emphasized detachment from vanities and the sincere search for truth. He taught that true wisdom is not in the accumulation of knowledge, but in the humility of recognizing the greatness of God. For him, science was a form of worship, a response of gratitude to the Creator. Veneration of St. Albert the Great has grown over the centuries, especially in scientific communities. He is remembered as a saint who did not fear the advancement of knowledge, but, on the contrary, encouraged it. He saw science as a way to bring people closer to God, showing that creation is a reflection of the Creator. St. Albert the Great left an example of fidelity to the Church and the truth. In a time of uncertainty and division, he showed that unity between faith and reason was possible. His life and work are an invitation for all Christians to live a faith enlightened by reason and a love for truth, following the example of Christ. His Marian devotion is also notable. He had a special love for Our Lady and believed that she was the mother of wisdom. St. Albert the Great cultivated a deep devotion to the Virgin Mary, recognizing her as the model of purity and obedience to God. He constantly invoked her, asking for her intercession to achieve divine wisdom and the understanding necessary to understand the truths of faith. In many of his writings, Alberto highlighted the role of Our Lady as the Mother of Wisdom, who illuminated the path of those who sought the truth. As a theologian, St. Albert also emphasized the importance of prayer. He believed that study and prayer should go together, as it was through contemplation that a true understanding of the mysteries of God could be achieved. He recommended that, before any research or reading, his students dedicate a moment to asking for divine enlightenment, recognizing that all knowledge comes from God. In addition to his devotion to the Virgin Mary, St. Albert the Great had a special affection for the Eucharist. He taught that the real presence of Christ in the consecrated host was the culmination of Christian faith, and that theological study should always lead to a greater love for the Blessed Sacrament. This love for the Eucharist was a source of strength for him, who, in his humility, considered himself unworthy of such a great mystery. The influence of St. Albert the Great was so broad that he is considered one of the first to study the relationship between faith and psychology. He wrote about the faculties of the soul and the importance of balance between body and spirit, seeing the human being as a unit. This approach, innovative for the time, inspired the Christian vision of the human person as an inseparable body and soul. St. Albert also wrote about Christian ethics and morals, arguing that virtue was the basis of every happy human life. He saw virtues as dispositions that bring us closer to God, and believed that moral development was fundamental for any seeker of truth. The practice of virtue, for him, was a way of living the divine order in our own lives. A little-mentioned aspect of his life is his commitment to interfaith dialogue. St. Albert believed that truth was not the monopoly of a single culture or people, and that it was possible to find fragments of truth in other traditions. He studied the works of Arab and Jewish philosophers, seeking a deeper understanding and showing that dialogue could enrich understanding of the Christian faith. This respect for other cultures and traditions also marked São Alberto's work as a teacher. He encouraged his students to study and understand the ideas of other cultures, teaching that openness to dialogue and mutual understanding was a reflection of Christian love. For him, intellectual charity was as important as material charity. In one of his most famous treatises, De Natura Boni, St. Albert explores the goodness of God reflected in creation. He describes how each created being manifests the goodness of the Creator, and how the harmony of the universe points to a higher order. This treatise is considered a masterpiece of natural theology and was fundamental to the development of this discipline. St. Albert the Great was known for his serenity and patience. Even in the midst of heated debates about philosophy and theology, he maintained a calm and respectful posture. He believed that truth did not need to be imposed by force, but discovered with humility and dialogue. This example of meekness deeply impacted everyone who knew him. Although he is widely recognized for his academic life, St. Albert the Great was also dedicated to preaching. He saw the pulpit as an opportunity to bring people closer to God, explaining the truths of faith in an accessible way. His eloquence and humility won the admiration of believers and scholars, and he was frequently invited to preach in different cities. His capacity for dialogue and his openness to knowledge earned him the respect of even his opponents. St. Albert was a master in using logic and reasoning to defend the faith, but he never used his knowledge to humiliate or impose his opinion. He believed that the true victory of faith was to convert hearts, not just convince intellects. In addition to his intellectual production, St. Albert the Great was a man of great kindness. He helped the poor, the sick, and the marginalized whenever he could. Even though he was busy with studies and writings, he never failed to assist those who came to him in search of comfort and guidance. His compassionate heart was a reflection of his love for Christ and humanity. St. Albert the Great left the Church a legacy of wisdom and humility. He demonstrated that holiness can be achieved through both study and charity, and that the pursuit of knowledge should always lead us to greater reverence for God. His life is a testimony that the true wise man is the one who allows himself to be guided by the Holy Spirit. The example of St. Albert continues to inspire Catholics around the world. He teaches that it is possible to be a faithful servant of God without giving up reason and science, and that all knowledge, when used well, can bring us closer to the Creator. May your intercession help us to cultivate faith and reason, and to always seek the glory of God in everything we do.